Welcome to the Defense and Aerospace Report. I'm Vago Muradian in Norfolk, Virginia, where we are covering NATO Allied Command Transformations Chiefs of Transformation Conference. And we are talking to Camille Grand, who is the Assistant NATO Secretary General for Defense Investment. Camille, thanks for joining us.
It's a pleasure to be with you.
And also congratulations and welcome aboard. You know, you started just a few months ago.
Indeed, October 4th.
And obviously not a lot of challenges on your plate. One of the things I wanted to talk about was, when people look at the alliance, they have a tendency of sometimes forgetting exactly how many major programs are being overseen by the alliance to give the entire alliance capability. Walk us through some of the critical programs and where they stand right now that you're working on.
Well, the Defense Investment Division and NATO is focused since Warsaw and before on a couple of key common-funded capabilities that we ought to deliver. And we declared initial operational capabilities for two of them this year. One is our joint ISR capability, which will continue to evolve with the delivery of the Allied Ground Surveillance AIL drone, NATO's Global AWACS, in fact. And that's going to be a critical asset for the alliance that will come into service in the next few months. Second one is our work on ballistic missile defense. NATO is delivering collectively the C2 for BMD in Europe. This asset is also, IOC was also declared at the Warsaw Summit in July 2016, and this is this is exactly what NATO does well, and we're working together is important if we have a proper C2 for BMD. Lastly, we've started work on the successor to the AWACS, what we call Alliance Future Surveillance and Control, which is really working on the system that will replace the AWACS in 2035. That might seem far away, but not for your viewers who know that we need to, if we want to be on schedule on that one, we need to start working now, and we are entering the concept stage for this major project. So you have here three examples of where common funded capability by NATO are delivering what allies can do best together. Next to that, of course, I also try to foster defense cooperation amongst allies. We have an initiative on precision-guided munition. We have an initiative on anti-submarine warfare. So all these things are things where we try to bring the allies together, and sometimes with success, sometimes with more difficulty, but it's on track, and it's very important to provide the alliance these strategic enablers.
Well, how do you make sure, though, many of these programs are over, we were covering Alliance Ground Surveillance System 20 years ago, right? It took a while for that program to come into service. What are some of the keys to make sure that all of these systems are interoperable, because they are developed a little bit in their own stovepipes and then they're coming together for the alliance? How do you make sure that all of these new systems are communicating with one another?
Well, I would argue NATO's core responsibility is interoperability. Interoperability amongst the nations, but also to integrate those systems. So from that perspective, what we do when it comes to AGS or AWACS, we put them in a broader capability, which is joint ISR. And so we build in this effort to develop our joint ISR capabilities, those programs that are coming into fruition or that we're preparing for the future. So the critical work there is really to ensure from the start interoperability. Interoperability has been a long-standing NATO asset and so on, but we have to do better on that, because today we need day one interoperability. We can't afford to fix the problems. Given what is the security environment, our responsibility is to make sure that we are not only able to fight together when we so decide, but to fight together on day zero of a crisis or a conflict.
Was the Afghanistan experience an important model to get the nations all on the same page? Because if you looked at it early in the operation, there were disconnects, whether on communications and elsewhere.
Afghanistan was a very tough but important learning experience for the alliance. We had to develop on a sort of emergency basis, and we did that reasonably well, an Afghan federated network, which has been essential to allow the allies to work together in Afghanistan. This model has been used for the federated mission network that we are currently working on as an effort. This is primarily an effort for Allied Command for Transformation here, which is to promote standards and ways to make sure that we can network not only the allies, but also the partners and other organizations, even like the UN, so that they can work with NATO in complex environments.
You've also said that it's important for your organization and NATO to change fundamentally the way that it does business. Everybody is looking for greater efficiency, everybody's looking for greater capability, and everybody's looking for greater speed. What does that mean for your department within NATO?
Well, our effort is a bit twofold. First of all, we know that common funded capabilities have been sometimes a bit late on delivery, and allies expect us to be on time and on budget. This is a challenge for everyone delivering capability, but this is all the more true in an environment at 28, where I have 28 bosses that expect me to deliver on time and on budget. Sometimes we're a little late, but we're not as bad as you would expect in such an environment. But we need to streamline the processes so that they provide a better system. We need to build up accountability throughout the NATO family, the agencies that are often responsible for that, but also the strategic commanders that provide us the military requirement, and the International Secretariat and my team that has the key in the management of all of this. So we want to have a better process, but we also want to insert throughout the process an ability to upgrade the system as we develop the system. And for new capabilities, that's going to be a critical asset. We can no longer afford to have something that we've put on a drawing board 10 years ago that is finally delivered. We need to have be much more adaptable and flexible. This is a challenging effort, but the more we focus our efforts on technology-intensive capabilities for common funded capabilities, the more important it becomes to have this sort of agile process there.
Oh, speaking about commercial technology, you've been an advocate of it. General Mercier, the head of Allied Command Transformation, has spoken very passionately about the need to do this. Obviously, Dr. Carter in the United States and the entire Pentagon leadership has been looking at how to engage commercial industry to get in and to try to help solve some of these problems. What are you guys doing at a NATO level to bring in some of those innovative contractors, some of which are very small, but very small and European, some are very large and American? What's the model and the approach in order to solicit these best ideas and operationalize them?
First, we try to engage this part of the industry. I mean, of course, we continue to talk with the big defense contractors that are running some of our major projects. But at the same time, we engage them in the multiple forums. The NATO Industry Forum, which is something we do jointly with Allied Command Transformation, is an example of that.
And you're a co-host of that?
Yeah, and I'm a co-host of that. And there we try to also bring in those companies that are not typical defense companies. Today at the Chief of Transformation Conference, most of the speakers from the industry are coming from Amazon, IBM, not from the standard defense companies. The same applies to our work on cyber. We have now a Cyber Industry Day at NATO where we talk to the cyber industry. And so we really try to engage that community, which for many of them, let's be honest, I mean, defense is already far and NATO is even further. But now they also realize that they have something to benefit from engaging with us because we bring their way of doing business to 28 nations that some of them are potential customers. We learn a lot from them, but we also bring some of the most stringent requirements that for such companies, IT companies, could be very interesting. So that's very important. Lastly, we are trying to put an emphasis on innovation. That was one of the decisions at the Warsaw Summit as well, and to develop our own ways to innovate. And NATO is not a large enterprise. We don't have the money to put 20 billion in the Silicon Valley tomorrow to engage this particular community. But what we can do is engage them as we do today in order to bring their ideas, their fresh ways of doing things into the alliance as much as possible, of course adapting the system so that we become ourselves more agile, more flexible, and more able to transform over time.
A couple of more quick questions. I know you have to go, but let me take you to the question of the role of the United States in all of this and some European concerns. Obviously, the change of administration has some in Europe concerned about the U.S. commitment to NATO. Obviously, what happens with Russia, Syria, Iran, vis-a-vis fighting ISIS or countering Iran, and where the NATO alliance could end up in that. At the same time, there's another concern, which is the United States is going to dump so much money into defense that it's going to race ahead and it's going to cause a capability gap with our allies. Two-part question. If you have advice to the incoming team, in so much as you can give advice, what would it be in terms of how best to look at the NATO alliance? And on the second case, what are some of the things the United States has to do, or NATO has to do, to make sure that a capability gap doesn't develop between these two critical elements of the alliance?
Well, it's not for me to give advice to the new team, obviously, but what is clear is that in NATO, any US administration will find its best allies with whom that are fighting along with the US in many settings, and that fighting together against ISIL in the Middle East relies on NATO's interoperability criteria and the fact that we train together, that we work together. So NATO provides from that perspective an invaluable tool to any US administration. Secondly, the US is obviously the largest player in the alliance. What is interesting in looking at the US debate is to see how the debate within Europe and within the non-US allies has changed when it comes to investment in defense. There's been a commitment in 2014 to go to those famous 2% in defense spending, but also 20% in investment, and the trend has been completely shifting. We no longer have declining budgets over Europe. We have now more than a third of the allies that have raised their budget and that are continuing to do so. So we are in a very different situation. And as the Secretary General put it recently at the NATO Industry Forum, if all the allies were to spend 2% as they've committed to in the next few years, that's an additional $100 billion on the plate of the alliance for defense capabilities. And that would be a huge game changer. This is more than the Russian defense budget.
And let me take you to the final question, which is industrial management, which is always a challenge. 28 countries, each one of them have their own defense industries. If you look at many of the biggest NATO programs, the United States, you could argue, is disproportionately represented at those ranks. What are some of the challenges ahead as everybody tries to do things more efficiently, but on the other hand, every nation has a certain sovereign defense industrial complex that they want to support, which they view as important to their sovereign capabilities?
What we can do is to invite allies to work together as much as possible. Obviously, I mean, most of the allies have some form of a defense industry, large or small, SMEs or large companies, in many domains. But many have something to bring to the table in that process. So from my perspective, the critical issue there is to invite the allies to develop projects together, to work well together, and to bring those multinational effort to fruition. There are good examples in the past. There are some that were not that good. Let's be honest about that. Cooperation can be difficult. But what is sure is that if we can work together and incentivize countries to pool their capabilities and to pool their industries into projects, that's a good news for the alliance.
And last question, on the AWACS replacement, is there an architectural approach to it? At one point, it was regarded as space-based. On the other side, it was unmanned. On another side, it was going to be another aircraft. What's the thinking? What's the latest thinking in terms of what that requirement's going to be so that the industry teams are thinking on the right level about what this replacement to the E3 fleet should be?
What we are trying to do at this stage is to invite the industry to come up with innovative solutions. So we don't run into this with a preconceived idea. We don't say we want a large plane with a radar dome. We don't say we want a large fleet of drones. What we're saying is come up with bright ideas. And our wild guess is that it's going to be a system of systems, but that system of systems, we don't, at this stage, want to predefine what it will look like. It will probably be a mix of different capabilities, and what's going to be critical in this is how do we manage to put this system of systems together so that we provide the requirements that the alliance need in terms of managing air operation and airspace. And I'm quite sure that the industry can come up with innovative ideas, and in the concept stage we're entering, what we're asking the industry through a series of contracts is to come up with these ideas and exchange with us on what are their ideas and allow them to develop them with some already significant funding.
And before I let you go, one clarification. Do you think that there is a danger of a capability gap expanding, or are you confident that both sides of the equation are going to work closely together to avoid that from happening?
Well, in terms of capability, I mean, we have two gaps to fill. One that we need to preserve, that is the gap with potential adversaries. And this is something that should be our first and foremost issue. Then we have a second issue, which is the transatlantic gap. And obviously NATO has to fully get into the consequences of the third offset strategy, to work with the new administration on, if that strategy survives, I guess it will in one way or another, to see where does NATO fit into that picture and where do we guarantee that we can still fight together and work together on a daily basis. And for that we need to be interoperable, we need to exercise, and we need to have a sort of constant dialogue on those capability requirements and those capability gaps.
Camille, thanks very much, and best of luck, and Merry Christmas and Happy New Year.
Thank you too.